Princess Annalise lived in a world of silk gowns and manicured gardens, but her heart yearned for the wild. She was to marry a dull prince from a neighboring kingdom, a man whose conversations were as flat as the royal tapestry. One day, escaping her suffocating duties, she found herself at a pond, a place forbidden to her. A small green frog sat on a lily pad, its golden eyes staring up at her. Annalise, feeling a strange connection, knelt down. "You are the only one who understands," she whispered to the frog. "I don't want to be a princess. I just want to be free." As if in response, the frog croaked, a deep, resonant sound. Annalise smiled, and without a second thought, she leaned in and kissed its tiny head. She had heard the stories, of course, but she never believed in such magic. She expected nothing, but the world shimmered. The frog didn't transform into a prince. Instead, the silk of her gown turned to a coarse, comfortable linen. The tight braids in her hair unraveled, and her polished slippers became simple, sturdy sandals. The pond, once just a decorative feature, now felt like the center of the world. She was no longer Princess Annalise, but simply Annalise, a girl in a forest with a frog on her shoulder. The royal duties, the dull prince, the gilded cage of her life, they all felt impossibly far away. The frog croaked again, and Annalise laughed, a sound so genuine and full of joy that it echoed through the trees. She had kissed a frog, and she hadn't found a prince. She had found something far better, herself. The Tailor and the Thread of Fate. In a town nestled at the foot of the Crooked Mountain lived a tailor named Finn, whose needles were sharp and whose spools were full, but whose heart was as empty as an unlined coat. He sewed for the wealthy and the poor, yet his work was purely mechanical. He felt no joy in the beautiful garments he created. His only companion was the silence of his small shop. One day, a mysterious old woman with eyes the color of a stormy sea came to his door. She didn't ask for a coat or a cloak, but for a single thread. "Not just any thread," she said, her voice like rustling leaves, "but one from your very own spool." Finn, seeing no harm, handed her a spool of plain gray thread. The old woman's lips curled into a smile. "This is no ordinary thread, tailor. This is the thread of fate. With it, you can mend not only cloth, but also sorrow." With those words, she vanished into the misty air. Finn scoffed, tying the thread to his needle. He began to mend a tear in a poor woman's dress, but as he stitched, he found his hands were no longer his own. They wove a pattern of shimmering golden light, and as the seam closed, the woman's face, once etched with worry, softened into a radiant smile. Finn tried the thread again, mending a little boy's torn trousers. The boy, who had been weeping, suddenly laughed, his tears turning to pearls that scattered on the floor. He mended a broken-hearted old man's coat, and with each stitch, the man's shoulders straightened, and a flicker of youth returned to his eyes. He spent the rest of his days using the magical thread, sowing joy and hope into the lives of others. The more he mended, the more his own heart began to fill. But as his life neared its end, he looked at his spool and found it was completely empty. The thread of fate was gone. He had given away every last inch of it. Yet, as he closed his eyes, his heart, once an empty vessel, was now overflowing with a lifetime of mended sorrows and woven happiness. A true masterwork of his own making. The cobbler's shimmering thread. In a village nestled by the ancient, murmuring forest lived a humble cobbler named Elias. Elias was known for his steady hand and honest heart, but his workshop was poor, and his clothes were patched, for fine leather was scarce, and coins even scarcer. He mended boots and slippers, always with a kind word, but his greatest wish was to craft a pair of shoes so beautiful, so perfect, they would make the wearer feel as if they walked on air. One brisk autumn evening, as the last light faded from the sky and Elias prepared to close his shop, a tiny, iridescent thread lay upon his workbench. It shimmered with all the colors of a rainbow trapped in a dewdrop, glowing softly in the dim light. Elias, mystified, tried to pick it up, but it felt like spun moonlight, insubstantial yet undeniably present. He carefully wrapped it in a piece of soft cloth, wondering at its magic. That night, Elias dreamed of the thread. It whispered secrets of long-lost patterns and forgotten stitches. He awoke with a clear vision, one he had never possessed before. He retrieved the shimmering thread, and though it seemed too fine for earthly work, he began to sew. He chose the softest scraps of leather he had, once destined for common souls, and with a glowing thread he began to stitch. The needle moved with an uncommon grace, and where the thread passed, the leather seemed to soften, to gleam with an inner light. As he worked, a wondrous pair of dancing slippers began to take shape. They were light as feathers, adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow like water. When the slippers were complete, they pulsed with a gentle warmth. Elias, marveling at his creation, slipped them onto his own calloused feet. Instantly, a lightness filled him, a joyous energy that made him want to leap and spin. He danced around his small workshop, feeling not the weight of his years or his poverty, but the pure delight of movement. Word of the miraculous slippers spread like wildfire through the village and beyond. Lords and ladies, merchants and minstrels, all came seeking the cobbler's shimmering thread. Elias, with his honest heart, never hoarded the magic. He crafted shoes for all who truly wished for joy in their steps, taking only what was fair for his honest labor. From that day forward, Elias's workshop was never poor, nor his clothes patched, but his greatest treasure remained the joy he brought to others, one magical, shimmering stitch at a time. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, if you passed his window, you might still catch a glimpse of the kind cobbler, dancing softly by the light of a single iridescent thread. The Baker and the Whispering Grain. In a village cradled by the whispering willows lived a baker named Alara, whose loaves were as bland as river stones. No matter the flour or the yeast, her bread would rise no higher than a sigh, and her customers would turn away, their faces long. The baker's rival, old Silas, had a secret. His flour was milled from a single, enchanted grain that hummed with a quiet song, filling his bread with a flavor of sun-ripened fields and morning dew. One moonless night, Alara followed Silas to his mill. She found him asleep, a small cloth pouch clutched in his hand. Carefully, she pried it open and poured the single, magical grain into her own pocket. A faint, silvery light pulsed from it, and she hurried back to her bakery, her heart thrumming. The next morning, Alara mixed the grain into her dough. As she kneaded, the dough began to hum, rising not just in the bowl, but in a glorious golden wave, the air filled with the scent of spices and honey. She baked a single loaf, a masterpiece of crust and crumb. But when she cut into it, the bread was hollow. Inside was nothing but the echoing sound of a whispered song, a mournful melody that filled her ears and her mind. The grain had not given her its magic, but its sorrow. For it was not a grain of life, but one of stolen hope. A grain that sang of all the things it could not become. Alara, cursed to hear its sad song forever, baked no more, a prisoner to the echo of her greed.